No, what I wanted to talk about was that we just can't blindly prescribe exercises because the trend always seems to be like, oh, there's high EMG activity for this activity, therefore it is a good thing.
Right.
When the reality is that the EMGs are really good at picking up concentric activity and not as good at picking up static and eccentric orientation of muscles, right? So high concentric activity is not necessarily always a good thing.
Right.
And so just let's pick on I's, T's, and Y's because it's easy, right? So those things get prescribed like nobody's business under every shoulder protocol known to man because they have been demonstrated in the research to have high EMG activity. But the reality is it could be the exact wrong thing to do if I'm trying to restore someone's movement capabilities under certain circumstances. It doesn't mean it's a bad exercise, it just means that it's prescribed kind of blindly at times because people say, well, it's good for you, and then they prescribe it. But the reality is it doesn't help people, and it can be a hindrance.
Well, so then, all right. I'm your traditional physical therapist coming out of PT school, and I see that someone's lower trap is weak based on my manual muscle test that I did.
Right.
In my mind now, looking through that in this model, we have a decreased concentric orientation.
Oh, wait. You can't say that. You can't say that. You can't say that because if I move it in either direction, if I eccentrically orient it or if I concentrically orient it, I can produce the perception of give way, which is identified poorly as weakness.
Right.
And now I'm taking a concentrically oriented muscle and I'm training it harder in a concentrically oriented position, and I'm creating a compressive strategy in the same place, which will ultimately limit my ability to recapture certain elements of range of motion or create a compensatory strategy to achieve an outcome. Sure. So for instance, if I do I's, T's, and Y's with somebody that is already compressed in the dorsal-rostral area, and I say that this is my external rotation measure, but what if I drove this exercise so hard that when I measured you on the table, I was actually measuring a tilted backwards thorax, and so now it looks like I've got plenty of external rotation, but yet I can't achieve an overhead reach. I can't get normal flexion, right? Or I can't get horizontal abduction, or I can't circumduct my shoulder because I drove this concentric orientation so hard that I compressed the dorsal-rostral area. Now I've made a mistake, and that would be my prescription. That was the problem.
Right.
Right? So I did the exact wrong thing because I didn't understand what I was really doing. And so that's why we can't blindly prescribe things. We can't generalize exercise programs. So let's take 10 baseball pitchers. And then they're all going to, because they're pitchers, right? Magically, they have the same needs. They're all different heights, they're different body weights, they're different shapes. All of their physics are different. And yet they're going to do the same 10 exercises because they're throwers. And this is going to somehow be useful and accurate and helpful. So maybe 3 out of the 10 guys get an effect that is beneficial. And then 3 guys you're not doing anything with. And then the other 3 guys are declining in their performance, and then the one guy is like your outlier. I don't know. Let's just throw him out. Let's make it 9. It's easier to go 3, 3, 3, right? But seriously, it's like we can't generalize an exercise prescription. So if I have a baseball pitcher that has limited breathing excursion and a wide ISA, he's going to achieve the outcome of throwing a baseball totally different than somebody that's really, really tall, like 6'5", 6'6", narrow ISA, built like a tube, right? They don't produce the throwing motion the same way. How could I possibly give them the same exercise program as some sort of prophylactic manner? I just can't do that. I can't think that way because it would be wrong. Like I said, for some people it might be the perfect thing, and for someone else it might be the exact wrong thing.
So yes, because they are individuals, they're going to need a different prescription of activities to boost whatever issues they may be having, right? what do you think of the argument that because they're doing the same activity, there's similarities within that activity, so exercise prescription should look somewhat similar because of it's the same activity?
Well, I would say that there's certain elements that would be similar but different. So for instance, if I had somebody that, again, let's just look at the physics of the individual, right? So if I have a shorter, wider torso relative to a taller, slender torso, their helical angles are different. So if they do turn, they turn at different angles. And so I can't set up, like, let's just say I prescribe both of them like a half kneeling chopping activity, right? I have to respect the helical angle at which I am performing that activity to optimize it for that person. So I can't set it at the same angle. I can't give them the same cues. They're going to produce turn in a different way. And so again, I can prescribe both of them a chopping activity, but my cues are going to be different, and the exercise is going to be different because they don't do it the same way. So yes, they both throw, but they're not performing the same activity.
Right.
We call it the same because visually it looks the same, but because they're producing it differently, it ain't the same.
Gotcha.
Right? And so again, we just have to individualize this a little bit more effectively. Because if I have somebody that has a dorsal-rostral that is already compressed and I give them a compressive strategy, I didn't help them. Maybe they can overcome it. And maybe they're good in spite of my programming, but I certainly didn't enhance anything. So when we think about how we're going to prescribe an exercise like an ITY kind of a thing, it's like there's going to be a very select group of people that will benefit from that, right? But my typical, if you think about the compensatory sequence that somebody with a wide ISA goes through, they're closing this area first.
Right.
That's after the ISA, they're closing this. Do I really want to give them another activity that's going to close it farther and then drive another compensatory strategy? I don't know, because maybe from a performance standpoint, maybe they do something better. But did I compromise something else as a secondary consequence? Did I compromise some health maybe? I don't know. But that's why we have to measure these things, but we also have to be concerned that we're not just blindly throwing exercises at people in some form of generalized philosophy. Because
right.
it just doesn't work that way.
Right.
So again, it's like, what are like the main arguments for selecting these activities? And it's like, all right, well,
let's talk about, so let's do this. So let's talk about who that type of exercise would be great for.
Sure.
So let's talk about that, because I think we have some predictive capability as to who would benefit from that type of an activity.
How about go over exactly what is happening at the thorax when you're doing an activity like that?
Sure.
So establish that first, and then
Right.
we can dictate.
No,
who
absolutely.
exactly that
absolutely.
would benefit.
So let's think about the most external musculature that we would talk about in the dorsal-rostral area. So we're talking like lower, middle, upper trapezius, right?
Right.
So we've got basically a big triangle of musculature that is the superficial layer,
Mm-hmm.
right? And if this musculature contracts, it presses down on everything underneath it. So this big triangle is what we have to make a decision as to whether we want to smush it down and not let it expand, right? Or do we want to allow it to expand to recover something? Right? And so we kind of know that if I compress this, I have to give up certain motions. So if I compress this area, I can't reach overhead, I can't horizontally abduct, I can't achieve normal external rotation of the shoulder. I just can't.
So if I'm any baseball player that we've laid on this table, they've had hopefully, especially if they're a pitcher, they've had hopefully more than 90 degrees of shoulder ER.
That would be a typical adaptive capability of a pitcher for a number of potential reasons.
Now, in my mind, that's not quote unquote normal though.
No.
And that often occurs via compensation.
Yep.
Because something's being posteriorly oriented in order to allow for that much range of motion to occur.
Correct.
So now if we take away some of that compressive element, we're also taking away their need to posteriorly orient their thorax.
Right.
So now,
So let me step in. So we don't know from a performance standpoint whether that's a good thing or a bad thing.
right.
Right.
But do you think as soon as they get step right back on the mound and do the task that they need to do, they're going to go right back into their strategy that they've always gone into?
Entirely possible, because it might be their performance enhancement, but left unchecked, they can reinforce that strategy, and then the strategy becomes overpowering, and then they give up something that they might actually need from a health standpoint. And so this becomes the big challenge when you're working with an athlete. And that's why you can't generalize exercise prescription. And so, yeah, if they get up on the mound and they got to throw, 96, 97 miles an hour, they might have to do something that is a compensatory strategy under our normal circumstances. But does that mean that I want them to live in that compensatory strategy, drive it even farther, and then give up something that they do need to recover on a regular basis? Right? So again, am I reinforcing something for performance, or do I need to dampen something to allow them to maintain health?
Right.
So again, do I have a pitcher that comes in, oh, my shoulder hurts or my elbow hurts or whatever it might be? It's like, well, why is that? Right? And so now I have to be the good therapist, and I have to say, okay, I can't prescribe this exercise as much or not at all, because it appears that it is allowing the compensatory strategy to linger or become so predominant that I've given up something that would compromise health.
So it seems like the main conundrum here is that a lot of people prescribe these exercises thinking that it's more of a health benefit for the throwing athlete, when in fact a lot of the adaptations that are being created here might be more geared towards the performance side and robbing them of quote-unquote health.
But see, I think that that's the unknown until you start to work with somebody over time.
Right.
Because again, you just can't say that, oh, this is arm care. Well, maybe it is for somebody, but maybe it's not for the next guy, and that's the problem, right? So our intentions are honorable, right? We want to help people.
Right.
We want to enhance performance. We want to maintain health. But without looking at them as an n=1 scenario, we can create problems, because you can't generalize anything. There's no such thing. There's no such thing as a general adaptation. Every system in your body adapts specifically, right? We can have broad influences on multiple systems.
Right.
But there's no general adaptation. There's no one prescription that works for everyone, and we have to respect that. And if we don't respect that, then we create the problem ourselves. It's difficult to work with a large group of athletes.
I was thinking about this the other day, where everyone kind of freaks out over like scapular winging, but a lot of times we're almost trying to recreate that in this room, but we're calling it like scapular decompression.
But it's not winging.
So
Okay,
how would you define a winged scapula, though?
I wouldn't. I just wouldn't define it that way. It's probably blaming the wrong element of the movement system, right? It's like the scap is doing the best that it can under the circumstances. It's attached by 17 muscles, and you're going to try to achieve an outcome, right, with your hand or your extremity or whatever it might be. But if I have an exhalation strategy or a compressive strategy that doesn't allow the shape of the thorax and the scap to be
Mesh.
coherent with each other, then why are you blaming the scapula? Because then it redirects everything back towards the high MG activity and say, oh, you need more low trap strength, or you need middle trap strength, so we need to do I's, T's, and Y's. When you're already compressed to begin with, that's what pushed the thorax flat, right? Instead of allowing it to be round, so it actually meets the scapula the way it's supposed to be.
Right.
Right? And so now again, it's my fault, bad exercise prescription, because I blamed a structure that didn't deserve it. Well, but I think a lot of things get misdiagnosed as, oh, you need strength. And I don't, again, okay, is it force production, or is there some other element that you're chasing, or your belief system? And are we really going to be like the stretch what's tight and strengthen what's weak kind of a thing, which is Maybe accidentally you get a return on investment, entirely possible. But the reality is, I don't think that it's very useful as a model.
Right.
Right? I think that we have to look at your ability to expand and compress, change the shape that allows you to move, and understand what those are. I think that's a lot more effective than saying that, oh, you have a muscle. How could you possibly have, if muscles existed in isolation, how could you possibly have a singular muscle, short of a directly altered through some form of trauma, right? How could you have a singular contractile element that would be weak relative to everything else around it, like unless like neurologic or whatever can happen clearly, but the point being is like, really? I mean, under normal circumstances, you're going to blame that when we know that the influence of position is so powerful in regard to how you produce force? It's just an ineffective model.
Because I mean, that's always where the argument goes. It's like either motor control or like focal loading of specific tissues or something like that.
Tissues benefit from load. There's no question about that, right? There might be an adaptation. And again, there are adaptations that enhance performance but may be detrimental in regards to the secondary consequence. But that's why we have to monitor things over time for change. It's like, what am I giving up? It's like, how strong does somebody need to be? Well, as soon as you start losing something that's more important or as important from a performance standpoint, then that's probably where you need to start thinking about making a change. This is one of the most difficult things to do when we're talking about performance, right? Because there are so many factors involved. That's why we can't really pick on people for making decisions, because again, they're just working from a framework or a model that has limitations, just like we do. So when would it be useful to compress that area? What would be the goal? What am I trying to reacquire under those circumstances? So if I have expansion posteriorly and compression anteriorly, so if I have a down pump handle, but I can expand posteriorly, that means I probably don't have shoulder internal rotation on that side.
Right.
So wouldn't it behoove me to create a compressive strategy posteriorly to allow me to expand anteriorly and recapture that internal rotation?
For sure.
So now I have an exercise that actually might be useful, and now I actually have a marker that I could use that says, hey, you know what? You should do a Y exercise. Because you sort of fit the appropriate findings for that activity.
Right.
And vice versa. So if I am compressed and I don't have my ability to reach overhead or move in a horizontal plane, if I can't move in that direction, then I need to recapture that. So now it's the wrong exercise for me.
So now that's starting to sound like the kind of person that would have your typical GIRD presentation. But in my mind, that kind of person has so much compression all the way up. Maybe
so.
That kind of activity wouldn't be beneficial for them whatsoever.
Correct. So that's why you have to look at what represents this, especially in this area, what represents the movements that are associated with my ability to inhale or exhale in this area. So if I cannot expand this posteriorly as I breathe in, then I might have what looks like external rotation on the table, but I don't have an overhead reach. I don't have the ability to reach back horizontally, right? And so then I know that I don't really have expansion here. And so me selecting an ITY exercise under those circumstances is the wrong thing to do. It's just the wrong strategy based on those findings. You can't look at one measure and say, this is external rotation, because external rotation and internal rotation are happening all the time in every direction. It is just a bias in one direction or the other. The 0 points have been measured incorrectly. The zeros are at the ends of the motion, and they're just superimposed. So internal and external are biases. They're not absolutes. We don't have an imaginary 0 point from the dead guy anatomy. That's wrong. That's the wrong way to measure it. So if we look at those type of exercises like the I's, T's, and Y's, face pulls, anything where we would describe it typically as having a lot of scapular retraction. So everybody thinks that scapular retraction is always a good thing, and it's not necessarily a good thing. What we really should understand is that while the scapula can be friends, they should never mate. Because if you do squeeze them together and they do approximate, that means that the thorax has to move forward. And that's a compressed thorax that does not inhale in that position. And so if I drive that hard enough, and you've seen this with our Terry project, where Terry was doing I's, T's, and Y's for 2 years in an attempt to correct his posture, and came in with the most ridiculous forward head, the most compressed upper thorax, and this big giant lower rib cage. And literally by taking those things away from him, teaching him how to reach, and then restoring his ability to vary his breathing, now we've got this amazing change in height. He's actually taller than he used to be, and now he moves better and feels better about the way he looks, because while he's not in pain, his dancing is a big deal to him, and so that requires an appearance that is favorable. But under most of these circumstances, when we're talking about using the upper extremity to drive the concentric activity of this musculature, what we're seeing is a compression of the medial border of the scapula into the thorax. So we're literally pushing this in. So that's what the lower trapezius do. So they'll turn these inward and compress the medial border of the scapula, and closes that space. I have concentric orientation. I'm pushing the thorax towards the board in this case. I cannot expand, and I immediately lose my ability to externally rotate the shoulder because of the orientation of the scapula and because of the lack of expansion in that area. So I can't reach overhead, I can't ER, and I can't move in the horizontal motion away from the center of my body.